Let's take a look at a video where a pastor ignorantly gish gallops his way through some stuff about atheism.
Imagine living in a world without ultimate meaning, where morality is just a social construct and the origin of everything you see is left to chance. It sounds bleak, right? But what if I told you that atheism, which is the belief that there is no God,
This is a very common misconception that we go over quite often. I'm not sure where this stems from, but it's an amalgamation of misconceptions, and there's far more nuance in this sentence than he's letting on, or that he might even be aware of. You'll likely have heard from internet atheists that atheism is the lack of belief in a god or gods, rather than the firm position of no gods existing. This is the difference between soft and hard atheism. The majority of atheists I have met and interacted with take the soft atheist approach. That is, they have not been presented with enough empirical evidence for the existence of a god or gods. However, the pastor in this video seems to be speaking about the hard atheism position, that is, the strong claim that there are no God or gods. This position is often held in formal philosophical debates as taking a soft position is unfalsifiable and thus not suitable for a formal position in a debate. Additionally, I would advise people to avoid using words such as belief because it tends to be conflated with the colloquial meaning of the word belief, that is, an idea that is held loosely, more often formally classified as conjecture, whereas religious belief is a firmly held position without need of evidence. I've noticed theists of all type tend to conflate the two quite a bit, and it often leads to dishonest practices in conversations and debates, a leading reason why atheists in these debates tend to demand hard definitions for words so that we can avoid confusion.
when evaluating any worldview, including atheism, it must pass 4 critical apologetics tests. The first is correspondence. Second, consistency. Next, comprehensiveness. And then practical application.
I hate to reiterate this in every video I review because this seems to happen quite a lot, but atheism is not a worldview. It does not qualify as a worldview. Atheism is a position on a topic. A position on that topic may influence your worldview, but it does not define it. A worldview encompasses the totality of one's knowledge, culture, and point of view. Atheism is not a culture, only shapes part of a person's point of view, and its only claim to knowledge in the hard atheism stance is that of the lack of the existence of a god or gods. The concept of atheism as a worldview is a position pushed by people like Frank Turek, Greg Koukl, J. Warner Wallace, and Ben Shapiro as an invisible antagonist they can use to sell you their products and to get you to attend their paid public appearances. If you're a theist watching this video and you want to make points against what you perceive to be an atheistic worldview, you will more than likely be making arguments against things such as naturalism, materialism, and empiricism, not atheism. Now let's talk about this apologetics test. This is an arbitrary system of measurement created specifically by Christian apologists to promote Christianity. It's not a remotely unbiased and objective method for measuring or determining the so-called validity of a worldview. Christian apologists started with their conclusion that Christianity is the ultimate worldview and constructed this test to support that idea. This is the opposite of how a fair and unbiased system of tests is constructed. First, this framework is circular. The tests assume criteria that align specifically with Christian doctrine, such as the need for objective morality or comprehensive explanation for the existence of the universe. Not all worldviews have a need for having an ultimate explanation of everything. There are worldviews that simply eschew this kind of knowledge in favor of self-improvement and fulfillment. Second, the criteria is extremely arbitrary. Why are these criteria used and not others that could encompass a worldview? For example, the idea of comprehensiveness favors religious systems over naturalistic or secular ones that do not, and do not claim to, offer a quote-unquote comprehensive view of the world. I could just as easily create a counter test that includes falsifiability, empirical support, and parsimony, which, given the arbitrary nature of those categories, would disqualify Christianity as a worldview. Third, these are loaded definitions. Terms like correspondence and practical application can be interpreted in ways that unfairly disadvantage non-Christian worldviews. For example, correspondence to reality is often twisted to demand that other worldviews account for non-material phenomenon such as objective morality. that those worldviews may not hold to and instead offers alternative explanations for the concept of human morality. Practical application is often conflated with concepts such as social stability and personal happiness, but these are not exclusive to religious frameworks. In other words, theists such as William Lane Craig have carefully defined these categories to ensure their worldview seems superior in this context. In this case, these tests are presupposing their own conclusions, making them unsuitable for impartial comparison. Finally, this test attempts to reverse the burden of proof. By framing every worldview as a positive affirmation, like Christianity, it unfairly shifts the burden of proof away from the apologist. The soft atheist position is not obligated to provide answers, and the hard atheist position is not obligated to provide answers to every existential question, merely the question of the existence of a god or gods. The rejection of a single claim is not a comprehensive ideology.
The correspondence test asks this: does this worldview match the observable world? Atheism claims the universe emerged from nothing without a cause.
I'm going to say this right here one time because the rest of the video will continue to make this false claim. Atheism claims nothing other than a stance on the existence of a god or gods. Are we clear? Moving forward, I won't address this because it will become repetitive. In addition to outright lying about the atheist position, the claim that atheists claim the universe began from nothing is also disinformation of cosmological science. Neither the lambda CDM model of cosmology nor quantum mechanics posits that everything came from nothing. Lambda CDM says we came from a hot, dense state of something, which we've colloquially termed the singularity, though actual scientists will eschew saying we came from a singularity, as singularities are more often than not seen as failings of our physical models rather than real substantive things. Some models of quantum mechanics posit that virtual particles can pop in and out of existence from the quantum vacuum. Take everything in the universe away, and you would still get quantum virtual particles. Why? Because the quantum field still exists. It's part of the fabric of reality we simply cannot get rid of, and thus is not the philosophical definition of nothing. Which is another problem that arises when theists make this claim, the intentionally misleading use of the word nothing. In this instance, the pastor is referencing the philosophical definition of nothing, that is, the complete absence of anything, no matter, space, or time. This is not the scientific consensus on the definition of nothing. If you take all matter away, you will still have space and time wherein the quantum vacuum and thus quantum fields exist. This is not the philosophical definition of nothing. Conflating the two definitions is an equivocation fallacy.
Yet the observable world shows us that everything with a beginning must have a cause.
Yes, the observable world shows us that everything has a naturalistic cause. So why does that naturalism suddenly stop at the moment t equals 0? Just because we used to not know how lightning worked didn't mean God did it. Just because we didn't know how planets orbited the sun didn't mean gods did it. And just because we don't understand the quantum nature of the moment of the beginning of the lambda CDM event doesn't mean God did it. If everything we've observed has a natural explanation, why would we ever assume anything other than a natural explanation for a natural event? To assume anything other than a perfectly reasonable naturalistic explanation without due evidence would just be committing a God of the gaps fallacy.
The Bible says in Hebrews chapter 3 verse 4,
Yeah, I don't care what your old book says. I'm going to skip his Bible quotes and move forward.
atheists argue that life exists by chance.
This is a very disingenuous straw man of the atheistic position. Apologists argue that atheists argue that life exists by chance. Naturalists argue that life exists because of natural processes. Natural processes are not random, they are deterministic. If you look at the lambda CDM event as some kind of random chaotic dice roll, then you could hypothetically argue that life happened by chance, but realistically, the only chance you could be arguing for is when and where life develops, not if life develops.
But scientists have shown that the universe's constants like gravity, electromagnetism, and others are fine-tuned for life.
If that's the case, then where's all the life? The observable universe is 27.6 billion light years in diameter, with upwards of an estimated 200 billion galaxies in our observable portion of the universe. We've made contact with exactly zero. Now, this often leads into a special pleading fallacy with theists, because obviously, if the universe is that large and we're the only life in it, we must be special, right? But then I thought the constants were fine-tuned for life. So which is it? Do we hold a special place in the universe? Or are the constants fine-tuned for life? You cannot have both.
Chance doesn't correspond to such precision. Isn't design a more logical conclusion? If atheism can't explain the origin and order of the universe, is it really aligned with reality?
And yet Christianity can't explain it either. It offers an answer to what caused things, God, but does not explain order or origin themselves. Rather, it hand-waves such questions away. What caused something is not an explanation for something. How something came about is explaining origins and order. Christianity does not explain how everything came to be. It merely posits that something did something.
Consistency asks, does this worldview contradict itself? Atheism, or atheists, often say morality is subjective, shaped by evolution or society. But then, why do atheists also claim things like murder or oppression are basically objectively wrong?
Basically objectively wrong? This is intellectual dishonesty to the point of being outright lying. A God not existing does not preclude objective morality. Objective morality can still exist in an atheist's worldview, assuming they adhere to something that would make morality objective. Yes, many atheists adhere to a subjective view of morality, but this pastor dishonestly proclaims that atheists declare certain actions to be, quote, basically objectively wrong, unquote. This is a fundamentally dishonest way of representing the opposing point of view. Another form of hand-waving.
Morality points to a moral lawgiver, God, who wrote the law in our hearts from the beginning.
If this is true, and morality is written onto our hearts by a moral lawgiver, then why are there so many conflicting opinions on things that are objectively moral? Take murder, for instance. Someone might consider the death penalty to not be murder, but I and many others do. Legal or not, it's still taking the life of a person that does not want to die. I consider that to be murder. Is this morally correct? Someone might argue that it is morally justified. I don't. Which part of our hearts is this specific moral law allegedly written on? Why do so many people so egregiously disagree with each other on this? Why are things such as the death penalty and abortion not just clear-cut and easily interpreted with strict moral compass? This disagreement does not point to an objective moral value system. Even if the statement that moral law was written on our hearts were true, the fact that we can disagree on how to interpret said objective moral law means those alleged objective moral laws are, in fact, subject to the interpretation of the individual.
God created the sinless pair, Adam and Eve. The sinless pair, Adam and Eve. And they had the law of God written in their hearts, but they made the wrong decision.
Again, I don't care what your old book says. Parables are fine for teaching young kids lessons on how to behave, but they're utterly useless for adult human beings that operate in reality. Speaking of which, if objective morals exist, how come we have to teach young children the difference between right and wrong? Why do we need to teach them not to hurt other people, to share, and to be nice? Did God not write objectively to love your neighbor as yourself in our hearts, such that we have to install such moral guidance in our children from a young age? It seems strange to me that toddlers need to be told not to violently hit their siblings or be corrected every time they pull on the family dog's fur. If objective morals exist, why does a child need to be taught how to share his toys to the benefit of everyone else? Objective morals, were they written on our hearts by a tri-omni creator God, should not need to be instilled in humans from a young age.
Atheists argue that a good God would not allow evil. Yet in rejecting God, they're left with no standard for calling anything evil. How can atheism condemn what it claims doesn't objectively exist?
Moral relativists don't claim that evil doesn't objectively exist. They claim that objective evil doesn't exist, and they differentiate between right and wrong based on the well-being of the person and the overall well-being of society. Murder is wrong because it deprives a person of their fully functional autonomy. Also, atheists don't argue that a good God wouldn't allow evil to exist. Atheists arguing against the omnibenevolent property of a tri-omni God would argue against that. That is, how could a God that is all-knowing and all-good also allow evil and suffering to exist in the world? You have to do some incredibly dishonest logical contortions to make it work, but it simultaneously makes your worldview become incomprehensibly illogical and fallacious.
If atheism is inconsistent with its own claims, can it really be trusted?
No, but nothing you've said contradicts the hard atheist claim of a God not existing. You've just made horrible strawman arguments against hard atheism, which is dishonest.
By the way, if you're enjoying this breakdown,
I'm really not. It's boring, repetitive, strawman arguments against an atheist boogeyman that Frank Turek constructed. Not anything intellectually engaging. It asks no difficult question, posits no unique points of view, and simply attacks the view that there is no God or gods with nonsensical rhetoric that is better aimed at naturalists, materialists, and empiricists rather than atheists. Quite frankly, Pastor Ben, I'm really disappointed in this so far, so let's hope the next 5 minutes are better. Spoilers, they're not.
comprehensiveness asks this question: can this worldview explain the big questions of life? Atheism argues life arose through chemical evolution, but life's complexity, especially DNA's coded information, defies naturalistic explanations. Notice that DNA is this coded information, and that this complex information must have come from information. Information must have come from information. Well, who is the origin of that information? Well, according to a biblical worldview, it's God. God is the great master builder with his information, which he encoded into us.
First, this is begging the question. By asking who is the origin of that information, you are presupposing an anthropomorphic mind behind the information coded in DNA. The field of abiogenesis posits that life arose from natural processes in the Earth's early conditions. The answer in that case wouldn't be a who, but a what. Second, Pastor Ben is conflating terminology again, using the colloquial term information, where the biological and information theory definition of information would be more appropriate. In everyday colloquial use, the term information basically means data sent intelligently from a sender to a receiver. In biology and information theory, information is an abstract concept which can be seen as any arrangement of symbols that can affect outcomes. In this case, DNA's supposed information is just a sequence of nucleotides that can be interpreted as instructions for building proteins by other chemical components. When viewed in this context, there is no need for an intelligence behind the information. Rather, it can more parsimoniously arise via chemical and evolutionary processes that continually cycle through a vast number of variations. Finally, the concept of information from information isn't necessary. This only applies if you assume that coded instructions require an intelligent source. Natural processes can generate what we label as information. Molecules, for example, can form a vast, innumerable number of combinations given enough time and multiple environmental niches. Also, as soon as a system can make imperfect copies of itself, evolutionary pressures can cause certain sequences to proliferate over others, which gathers and refines, effectively, functional information. Importantly, this is a bottom up process, and no teleology is required. Top down agents, such as a god that encode the initial blueprint, aren't needed any more than a snowflake needs a designer to form symmetrical information within its structure. The pattern emerges purely from physics and chemistry. Now, the rest of his video is just more strawmanning of atheism, and then he compares his strawman of atheism to Christianity when put up against his 4 critical apologetics tests, which, as I stated earlier, were specifically constructed by some of the most intellectually dishonest human beings, specifically to promote Christianity. It's devoid of any objectivity in its evaluation, so there's really no point in continuing past this. If you want to watch this intellectually devoid apologist spout propaganda for 3 more minutes, be my guest. Personally, I'd rather watch Braxton Hunter. At least he tries to bring something new to the table.